this story is sort of near and dear to my heart because the last company I built, I forgot to do this. And 2 years in, I burned through my first round of venture capital, building a business that was ultimately not viable. So my hope here is I give you at least some tools or a way of thinking about modeling out the viability of your business so you don't make the same mistake I did. Most people think that the money I lost, the venture investor money I lost, was the real tragedy there, but the bigger tragedy was 2 years of my life building something that wouldn't scale. So I hope that you guys don't fall into that trap as well, and these will be tools for you. So overall, our goal today is to understand the viability of the business that you're building through an interactive workshop where we'll look at your business model and some market assumptions. This is usually pretty approachable at an early stage for a company, but almost every company has a little bit of a bump in trying to identify the model for themselves, and I'll be here to work with you on it, and my hunch is Zach can cruise around as well. But ultimately, the goal of this is to make sure that you're spending your precious time on this earth building something that can meet your own expectations as a business. So hopefully I can give you that gift throughout today. When we think about companies, we think about feasibility, desirability, and viability. So feasibility is, can you actually build the thing that you want to build the product? Like, is there technology available? Do you have the skills to do it? Is it feasible? Desirability goes into, is this something that people actually want? And then viability is, can it sustain itself in the long run as a business? Typically, we talk a lot about feasibility when you're starting a company. Most entrepreneurs start and say, like, hey, can we build a product to solve that problem? So that usually comes out in investigating the technology situation, hacking on some code, building some prototypes. That's usually how you figure out the feasibility of something. On the desirability side of things, usually you're out in market talking to customers. You maybe do some market analysis to see if there's demand. Zach is a huge proponent of customer empathy interviews. He's probably taught you a bunch of that stuff. That's how you figure out desirability. And the tool I'm going to teach today is an easy way to understand viability, which is the third component when you're thinking about a business. And the way we do this is through something that I call a market model. This is not I didn't pull this from anywhere. It's something that I made up based on my experience. So you might be able to Google, if you Google like a market model, I'm not even sure what actually comes up. So this is more like my world than some common business practice out there, but it's worked super well in my experience working with a bunch of startups, my own and at Techstars. And the way that the market model works is we're gonna build a bottoms up model of what it takes for you to get to $1 million in revenue. And there are three components of that. Starting from the bottom is your revenue formula. So this is going to give you an understanding of how many products do you have to sell to earn $1 million in revenue. There'll be a bunch of assumptions in there, but that'll give you a general number of like, oh, I need to sell 10,000 widgets. Or maybe if your product is relies on advertising, I need to have this many page views, or whatever that stock of things that you need to earn $1 million. Once we understand that, then we look at the funnel formula. And this gives you insight into how many people do you need to reach to then sell that many products. And then we zoom further up the stack and figure out how much will it cost to reach those people. And this should give you a good sense, because if at the top it costs you $10 million to earn $1 million, you probably shouldn't pursue that business. Or you need to rethink the assumptions or the pieces of the model to make that a profitable business. So this is sort of this model combines down at the bottom kind of like a financial model with up at the top a market or acquisition model for a company. So what we're going to do today is do a workshop on this on your business. I brought sticky notes, Sharpies. It takes about 45 minutes, and we'll try to figure this out for your company here today. And while we do this, I'll have someone from each company come grab a Sharpie and some sticky notes in a second, but there's a few assumptions in this, which is I'm going to assume for now that your business is feasible and desirable. I think you're probably still figuring a bunch of that out, but for the sake of today, let's assume that those first two things exist, and we're just understanding the viability. Cool? There's a few things to think about in this model. The first is usually you're building something that's new, and for things that are new, there's a lot of known unknowns, right? Like you don't know what your conversion rate is at some point in your funnel. You may not know how much you need a revenue share with a partner to help you produce a product. Like there's a bunch of unknowns in there because it's new. That's okay. What's cool about this exercise is it identifies what those known unknowns are, and you can start guessing at what the numbers are. And then over time, as you get into market, you can refine that and say, oh, it's not 4%, it's actually 5%. And you can tweak that model and realize like, oh, if it's 10%, we don't have business. If it's 4%, we're good. If it's 1%, we're great. So, you know, I understand that in the situation you're in, you may not know some of the inputs, but that's okay. And then the second is that, like, usually you're working on something that's young, and since it's young, there's some unknown unknowns, which means like, well, we're not even sure how we're gonna get customers, or we don't know our business model. Here in this model, you can try a bunch of stuff out, and that's also okay. So regardless of if this model tells you if you're viable or not, it'll give you a deeper understanding of various parts of your business and the underlying engine. Cool? Before we get started, what questions do you have? Cool. Make sense? Okay. Let's do this. Let's get started. If you could sit with your team, that'd be great. And could you send one person up to come grab? And I'm going to go through the exercise with you and share the real life story of my last company, so you can see what that looked like for us. So before we actually get started, you should probably know what that company was. So it was a company called Everlater, and it was a travel blog site. So you could blog about a spring break trip, you could blog about a study abroad trip, you could blog about any sort of travel experience online, and then you could buy a printed photo book version of your photos and your stories. And so our business was, you create this online blog, and then some percentage of those people purchase a printed photo book. So that was the business that we thought was a great idea to start. I will, when we go through this exercise, like I'm gonna show you the real numbers for my company, which we only learned 2 years in. So when you see the numbers, I think you'll be surprised that it was pretty foolish of us to not look into this earlier. But I wanted to make sure you understood the context of the business. Does the business that we were creating make sense? It feels pretty like straightforward, right? We sell printed photo books of online travel blogs. Cool? All right. So the first thing to work on with your team is figuring out what your revenue formula is. So this is figuring out like how do you generate revenue. So on the right, your first sticky, you can write revenue, and then you're basically going to put on each sticky each piece of the function of how you earn revenue. And your goal is to get to some number of either like units sold, page views generated, products sold. So you can see here in our example, we started with revenue on the right side and worked back up to the number of photo books being the driver of how much revenue we can generate. So in our model, is number of photo books times the average selling price per book, with share a percentage of that revenue with our partner who's actually printing the books, and then that would leave us with our revenue. So if you could I'll give you 4 minutes right now to create your revenue formula, and then we'll start filling it out. Question? Yeah? One revenue. Thank you for asking. So the question is, what if you have more than one revenue stream? For this exercise, let's pick one. Pick the one that you're most excited about, and then one thing that's cool about this exercise, you can rerun it for all different revenue streams, but just pick one for now. Any questions? Okay. Do you guys do the Zach Neese, like if I raise my hand thing? Okay, so look up my way, and I'll get you back together in about 4 minutes. How many of your product do you need to sell in a year to reach 1 million in revenue? So you can see our model up here was we put 1 million in here, and the way we worked ourselves back up was, and one hack is when you have these symbols, you invert them to work your way back up to the left. So if you take 16,667 photo books times $120 per photo book times the 50% that we would share with our partner, that equaled $1 million in revenue for us. So the goal is to figure out now this number right here, which is how many of those products do you need to sell to reach $1 million in revenue. All right? What questions do you have on this step? Yeah, questions?
Oh, never mind.
Okay, sure. All right, you got 4 minutes to figure it out. Who would like to share how many things they need to sell? Yeah, go ahead.
33,333.
Cool. And what of what?
Smart vent covers.
Cool. Yeah.
We take a percentage of our bets, and that could be different price, but we said the average bet price is $5, and we need to get 20 million bets per year.
20 million bets per year. Cool. All right. Others? Yeah.
200 million users through ads.
You've already jumped ahead on Henry. That's the next step.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you're saying you need 200 million eyeballs.
Yeah, I guess.
Okay. All right.
Well, I think that'd be 400 million.
All right. Anyone else want to share theirs? Yeah, here.
We need 200 teams to be using our software.
200 teams. Cool. Yep. And last one back there.
So we kind of checking on the ads that people see. So we need like 1,000 $, so we need like a bigger deal.
All right. All right. Cool. So in our scenario, we need to sell 16,667 photo books. So we just did the revenue formula here. The next step is we're going to keep going up and understand how many people you need to reach to sell that many of your products. So, you know, how many teams do you need to have in your funnel to sell? Was it 100 teams?
200.
200 teams to sell 200 teams, or you need 20 million bets. So how many people do you need to reach to generate 20 million bets? All right. So the next prompting question for you is, what is your funnel formula? So you can take the sticky that you had on the far right, or your far left, which was the number of units. Now put that on the far right, and you have your number on there. Now just build the formula back up to see how big of an audience you need to reach to sell that many units. And what you're understanding here is there's some sort of funnel, right? There's some sort of fall off. Like if you're selling teams, you're not going to convert every team that you reach out to. So you have to have some assumption in there that 5% of the teams that we reach out to will sign up for our product or whatever. And for you guys, you know, on the bets, like you're going to need to get in front of some number of people, and some percentage of those are going to place bets, and those people are going to place on average 20 bets per person or something like that. And your goal is to figure out how big of an audience you end up needing to reach to then generate that many sales. And don't worry about the numbers in here, just worry about the formula itself. The numbers will be the next step. Cool? Questions? All right, you got 4 minutes. Funnel formula, just as an example for you all. So, you know we need to sell a certain number of photo books. What we learned through the process was there's only a percentage of people who we reach who will create a blog on our site. They're maybe not traveling, maybe they don't want to blog. So we knew that there was some percentage who would create a blog, and then some subset of the people who would create a blog would purchase the photo book. So we knew that our formula here was some total audience times the percent who would create a blog times the percent of those blogs made into books would equal the number of photo books that we would sell. Ours is pretty straightforward. So the next step is to work back up and start putting some assumptions into this model to understand how big of an audience do you need to reach to generate $1 million in revenue. So you can start putting in numbers into your funnel formula, and these will probably be guesses. A lot of them are guesses. By definition, it'll be wrong because models are never right. But at least it gives you a sense of, hey, this is what we think will be our formula. So you can see the assumptions that we had in our model. And the nice thing was we had actually been in market for 2 years, so these numbers were actual numbers from our product. And so I know in your case they'll be guesses, but why don't you fill out your model now and figure out how big of an audience you need to reach to sell however many units you have on the right side of your
Would you like a little trivia there?
Yes.
Which is, you'd have to be today, a bigger site on the web than adobe.com.
Yes, so sometimes it's hard to see this here with the commas, but our model, when you work it back up, we needed to reach 47,620,000 people a year to generate $1 million in sales. And to Zach's point,
So.
that would basically be
every
like
month, that many go to adobe.com.
yeah. Womp womp. So figure out for you what your total audience is, based on some assumptions of what numbers go in the model. Cool? All right, you have 4 minutes to come up with an, okay, so I'm curious if anyone would like to share how big their audience size is that they need to, and ultimately generate $1 million in revenue. Yeah?
4.9 million.
Well, and I worked with a company over here, and this model that we're going through, my example, is a B2C model. So it's like probably the same for you. That's like general consumers. But if you're a B2B model, it might be like for you guys. I don't know. Do you want to share the number of universities you got to?
1,000.
1,000 universities. So it doesn't always have to be people. It might be the type of customer that you have. Anyone else want to share? Yeah.
We came out to 8 million users.
Cool.
In between 1.6
So these guys bring up a good point, which is like, well, it's anywhere from 1.6 to 8 million. That depends on these inputs here. So what you're learning in that is like, wow, these inputs, like that's a big difference. So understanding what these inputs are in here is really important. Cool. Well, obviously in our scenario, we needed 47 million users. So at this point, I think it's good to ask, like, what does this imply, or does this tell you about your business? Like, do people feel, how do people feel? Like, how do you feel about 1.6 million to 8 million?
That's a few people.
Yeah, seems like a lot.
That's a daunting number, I guess.
Daunting number, yeah. What else did this tell you about your business? Yeah.
Need multiple revenue streams.
You need multiple revenue streams.
Another one right now.
Did anyone like at this point in the exercise, did they feel like, oh, that seems totally achievable? All right, yeah, cool.
All right.
Who else back there feels achievable? Right on. In our story, this is where the hubris of the entrepreneur can show up, is once we realized our number of 47 million, we were like, we got this, no problem, right? And so this is where the last part of this exercise comes in, which is the cost of acquisition side of things. And this is where you're trying to develop an understanding of, now I know how many people or universities or whatever software companies I need to sell to earn $1 million in revenue. How much is it going to cost me to acquire them? So the next prompting question for you to think about is, what are the channels in which you can acquire your customers? Like, where do they hang out? How are you going to target them? So I have up here on sticky notes a bunch of potential channels. What I'd like you to do now is brainstorm what channel do you think you're most excited about trying in terms of acquiring those customers, or what channels. You can come up with a few and be like, hey, we think for our business, like, it's going to be all about direct sales, or for our business, it's all going to be about social or viral. For our business, we think we're going to do online advertising and search engine optimization and something else. So just spend a few minutes thinking about what channels you could use to acquire those customers. And then the next step will be modeling out one of those. So why don't you spend a few minutes thinking, hey, these are our possible channels. Cool? What questions do you have about channels? Okay, cool. I'll give you 4 minutes to form a few different channels. You're gonna pick one, and you're gonna model out what is the formula, the cost per acquisition formula for that channel. So the channel that I chose up here was Google AdWords. And the way that Google AdWords works is you pay a cost per click to drive someone to your site. So we figured out, we put that total audience on the right side. Doesn't matter what the number is, you know, you'll carry that over. But right now you're just trying to figure out what is the formula for that channel. And on this channel, it was basically pay a cost per click. So your total cost is a function of the cost per click. So if you could model out one of your, whatever channel you feel like is most promising, what does the formula look like to figure out the cost of that channel? What questions do you have? Yeah.
What is the difference between viral and word of mouth?
Okay, so the difference between viral and word of mouth. Viral usually, they're similar. The way I would describe the difference is viral usually relies on some sort of internal mechanism that you may create that helps the spread of your product versus word of mouth is out of your control. So like a viral strategy might be, we reward people who refer traffic to us and we give them a commission of whatever, this is, you could call this a bunch of things, we give them a commission of whatever traffic they promote to us. That's sort of a viral growth strategy. If you add 5 friends to this service, we'll unlock something within the product for you, or word of mouth is largely out of your control, it's just people talking about it in the world. What other questions do you have? One thing to think about in here is sometimes there are like you might think of a channel like a partnership and you're kind of like, well, partnership, like how do I pay for that? What's the cost of that? But remember that partnerships take work, you gotta sign them, sometimes they need a financial commitment from you. What does that look like? So just think about getting creative on how you might model out what the cost of that could be. Cool? All right, I'll give you 4 minutes to figure out your cost of acquisition model for one channel. And if you finish one, you can pick a second one and do it just for the sake of understanding it a little bit better. So you probably guessed the next step here, which is to start to fill in the numbers for that channel. And as you can see in my example, the average cost per click for a lead on Google in the travel category is $2.25. So for us to generate $1 million of revenue costs us $107,142,857. So you don't have to be a mathematician to understand that is not a very smart business to start.
Make
So-
that up on volume.
Right. So anyways, why don't you spend a few minutes and, if you haven't yet, build the math back up from the audience size that you did in the previous version. Put an assumption into your model around what the drivers are of your cost of acquisition model and work your way up to a total cost. Sound good? Questions? I'll give you a few minutes to do this, maybe like 3 minutes. So let's go for it.